Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is the Banned Books Podcast, episode number
120.
120. And as always, we are your hosts, Christopher Gillespie.
Chillin' and willin', maxin', relaxin'. Will to power.
Blind in one eye.
Oh. I jumped the gun on that one.
What, blind in one eye?
Oh, I'm blind in one eye. Well, not blind, it's just refusing to focus.
Oh,
Minor problem.
I'm Donovan Riley. And I just refuse to focus in general, so.
I did hit my head, knocked my glasses off, like on that
maybe
side.
That's it. Maybe it was blunt force trauma.
About 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I don't know.
Mini stroke.
Yeah, or set something loose. No.
Pressure behind the eye.
I did scratch the glass too, so maybe it's forcing my eye not to focus. I don't know.
Could be. In this episode, we are going to turn the corner and leave Erasmus on salvation and free will behind us because we voted. And
can I just thank God for that?
And there you go. There's your answer. That was our Lenten discipline didn't last too long. Much like all Lenten, what you give up for Lenten disciplines, you never make it all the way through.
Yeah, those were like your New Year's resolution or something.
I was just about to say that's like a cut rate New Year's resolution.
we made it, what, 4 episodes?
4 episodes, which is more than enough time to cover that.
Yeah, 4. Yeah. I just tagged them on to the Bondage of the Will series, so they're just at the end of that because it makes sense. Nice. That's where they belong. Yeah,
little addendum to it,
right?
But now we're going to get into something a lot more fun, at least for myself.
Yeah, which
is we're going to read the writings of some pastors' kids.
But not just any pastors' kids.
But pastors' kids from the Enlightenment. And we're going to start with the OG of modern Protestantism, Friedrich Nietzsche, which we'll probably get to as we read. Why I just said that.
I think you jumped the shark on that one.
Right? Well, wouldn't be the first time. It's like yesterday we watched Jumanji, the more recent one.
Oh, with The Rock?
Yeah. It's actually quite funny. We actually enjoyed it. It's a nice movie. It doesn't stop. I
still think it's hilarious that they could make multiple movies out of a board game.
Right. Well, this is technically not the board game. This is the video game, Jumanji, that they discover in the church or in the school basement while they're taking staples out of old magazines. But
didn't they make a book out of the board game? It was a board game and then a book, or the other way around?
I don't know. Okay. I can't keep track. I don't know anymore. And but it's tight production wise. They keep things moving. They don't stop very long to make huge points or exposition dumps. They
it was a children's book first.
Sorry. There you go. But in the movie, then when they make the transition from the real world into the Jumanji, they have these 3 black bars on their wrist that they figure out represent their lives in the game. And so every time they die, they lose a bar. So then once they lose all 3 bars, they die permanently.
That's rough.
And that's a lot like this podcast, actually. We get to jump the shark 3 times per episode.
Who's counting? Before
we absolutely kill the podcast. So that was 1. That's just the first. But today, then, since you're not going to play ball, we're going to read.
What? No. What were you going to tell me about this show?
Which one?
Jumanji. Was that the point?
That was it.
Oh, okay.
It's just the 3 bars, the 3 life bars.
Okay, I got it.
We jumped the shark 3 times. 3 bars, 3 deaths.
Okay. So today on the show,
we're going to cover the Antichrist. One of the last things that Nietzsche, he didn't actually, it's not one of the last things he wrote, but he was working on it when he died, and his sister who was taking care of him, who was in charge of his estate, assembled, what did they call these? They're not theses.
Aphorisms.
Aphorisms, there we go. Collected these aphorisms into something readable.
From notes.
Yes. And so they do read as, theses or aphorisms. They're what do you want? They're not quite a Thanksgiving dinner of a thought, but not yet kind of candied thoughts either. They're kind of somewhere in between, more like a sandwich and a side of chips.
Not fruitcake.
But Friedrich Nietzsche was a Lutheran pastor's son, and he himself actually went to university. Was he did he get a master's of theology?
Divinity? I don't know, I was looking here. I mean, he ended up teaching, he had a professorship at Basel.
Yeah.
In classical philology, right? Which he, in Switzerland, by the way, Basel.
Right.
That was under Ritschl, actually. Got him that gig.
Albrecht Ritschl.
Which is another guy we should read. Yeah.
He definitely read Ritschl. Ritschl and his school of his students had a profound impact on American Christianity, actually.
So let's see. Okay. Anyway.
Dogmageddon?
No. It's it's gymnasium, but it's Doma Gymnasium. I don't know what that is. That must be like the city one. The main one. Dome, right? That's the center. Pursuing, becoming. Graduation in 1864. That's high school, it looks like. Then he went to Bonn. Hope of becoming a minister. Look at that.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. After one semester, he stopped theological studies and lost the faith.
Yeah.
That's what happens at college, isn't it?
And that's what happens at seminary for sure.
Oh, well. Yeah. Then he read Feuerbach.
Yay.
And that the argument that people created God, and that's when it all went.
That's when the wheels came off.
He studied under Ritschl at Leipzig.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't say what he got. Oh, he also studied Schopenhauer. Oh, see, there's another guy we could read.
That's right. Yep.
And then Friedrich Lang's History of Materialism, which brought in some Kantism. And where's it going to tell me his degree?
He actually in the Antichrist, he critiques Kant, I believe.
Okay.
Not a big fan.
He was awarded an honorary doctorate by Leipzig under Ritschl.
There we go.
So that's how he got the gig.
Highly educated, obviously. Mm-hmm. And we alluded to it when we discussed talking about these quote unquote philosophers or theologians in previous episodes. But at this time in particular, the time of the Enlightenment, and Nietzsche is definitely going to cover the waterfront on this. If you read the theology of the Enlightenment, especially the influence of Romanticism on the church, a lot of what these so-called atheists have to say in their critiques of Christianity, you might actually find yourself agreeing with.
Yeah.
And in particular, that actually much like Erasmus, so this is in a strange sort of way, an actual organic outgrowth of what we just read from Erasmus, is a lot of Enlightenment theology emphasized the ethics of Jesus. Like the Sermon on the Mount, for example, became kind of the thesis for the piety and the doctrine of the church.
Yeah, there's a conversation about that in the introduction to the Antichrist, which we're going to read, talking about how Nietzsche was critical, not of Jesus's teaching of the Beatitudes, but rather how St. Paul takes them.
Right.
Yeah, so this like heavy, like a dogmatic emphasis rather than a moral emphasis. Yeah.
And that's a good point too, and that this is the beginning of, by the end of the 1800s, it became very popular, the faith of Jesus and the religion of Paul.
Okay.
And like Albert Schweitzer, for example, I think wrote the most about how Paul actually created Christianity. What we call Christianity in the present tense was a creation of Paul, and you can't find it in the Gospels.
And then later on, in order to like reclaim Paul, then you have New Perspective on Paul.
New Perspectives on Paul.
Which basically argues that Paul, the way we've been reading Paul is wrong, and that's why we were excluding him.
Right.
And that if we read him as, a Jew of Jews, then with a more Jewish context, then he's much more in line with that kind of moralistic approach to Jesus.
Right. At the end of the day, they're all arguing toward the same point, which is a Christian philosophy.
Yeah, and that you can't trust the scriptures, actually.
Yeah, exactly. You can't trust God's word. It'll play with you. So in that sense, then, that's why I made the not so veiled joke that modern Protestantism actually takes a lot from Nietzsche in its own way, and we're going to get to that. But yet Nietzsche himself then is saying, listen, the heritage of guys like Erasmus has produced a kind of Christian ethicism, a Christian ethic, a Christian philosophy that doesn't really have that much in common with Jesus or the Bible as a whole.
The other thing is that the world of philosophy has had a pretty strong influence on Christian thinkers.
Correct.
Because they were being trained in university in parallel, with the school of philosophy.
Right.
And so you usually see it like 20 to 50 years, kind of somewhere between 20 and 50 years, depending on what period of history we're talking about, where the philosophy is being promoted, and then it's synergized, I guess, in kind of a dialectic way into the Christian faith. Because I was just thinking, you said Nietzsche is the OG of Protestantism, and the reason is that Nietzsche influenced, the philosophers, post-World War II philosophers like Heidegger and Sartre and Derrida and these postmodern, thinkers, Camus, right?
Yeah, Albert Camus.
Ayn Rand, right? Another one.
Oh yeah, Iron.
Yeah, I mean these Foucault. These guys were all picking up on Nietzsche and running with him. Even Carl Jung, right? So, and then and Christian, scholar. Maybe this is what it is that the Bible scholars are just generally speaking, scholars. So they're reading widely, and you can't help but have that, all this other thought that you're trying to at least be critical of, or at least consider, then to integrate it into your thinking and your approach to the scriptures.
Right. Which is one of Nietzsche's critiques of the church of his day too, is it's too abstract and too removed from reality. It's not concrete. It's not real. And also, if we get to Feuerbach, when we get to Feuerbach, we'll also see this in Feuerbach's critique of Christianity, is that the way they teach the Reformation, for example, when he finally discovers the primary text from the Reformation and discovers, this isn't actually what Luther and the Reformers had to say at all about these subjects, and like the Lord's Supper, for example, and how they spiritualized the Lord's Supper in his generation. And then when he finds Luther's writings on like the two natures of Christ, or anything that Luther had to write on the Lord's Supper, Feuerbach discovers that everything he'd been taught about Lutheranism was wrong. Yeah. Based, compared against the primary documents. And so what Feuerbach and Nietzsche and others rejected and therefore became quote unquote atheists, when you go back and read the primary documents from the Reformation, then read how they were taught by their dads, actually, who were their pastors, and other contemporaries, you can't help but say to yourself, actually, I think I would have been an atheist back then too, if this was the only option I had.
Well, I told you this, it was a couple of weeks ago now. Every once in a while I go back and read the two autobiographies I have of Lutheran pastors in my family from the 19th century. So, contemporaries of Nietzsche. And the one talks about, coming to the States to be kind of like a missionary pastor, to train in the seminary. He goes to the seminary, and the Lutheran pastors our seminary, Fort Wayne Seminary, is like, you actually aren't even a Christian. I mean, he's evaluating what he knows. He doesn't even know the small catechism.
Right.
He has some kind of, not quite atheistic, but certainly a moralistic catechism. I can't remember which one it is. I think he actually learned the Heidelberg Catechism, and not the Luther Small Catechism. But he comes to be a Lutheran pastor, and he hasn't been taught a thing of Christ and and saving faith. Yeah, and that's the waters that they're swimming in Hanover, where he came from. Yeah. Nietzsche's in Saxony. Prussian. It's Prussian Empire at that point, right? By the way, Nietzsche also fought in the Franco-Prussian War. And so he served like from 1871. Yeah. And most of his writing comes after that. So, like we were talking about way back it was before who was it? I can't remember now. Oh, Dostoevsky, right? Yeah. He also served in military combat. Mm-hmm. And it changes your perspective. Correct. On everything, I think, probably.
Right. Yeah, that kind of esoteric religion doesn't quite fly after you've been on the front line.
Yeah, there you go. That's right.
So let's dive into some of these aphorisms. We're not going to cover all of them because some are a little philosophically dense, and I don't think you want to listen to us wax philosophical for 45 minutes. So we'll just jump around here. But so aphorism number 2 in the Antichrist, and as Gillespie said, we'll post a link to this in the show notes. It kind of sets out Nietzsche's thesis for what follows. So, and you've probably heard this before in popular culture. So this is aphorism number 2. What is good? Whatever augments the feeling of power. The will to power. Power itself in man. So what is good? Whatever augments that feeling of power, of strength in man.
100% internal.
Yes. So then what is evil? Whatever springs from weakness. So good is strength. Evil is weakness. And whatever comes from weakness. Mm-hmm. So what is happiness? Happiness is the feeling that power increases, that resistance is overcome. So whatever increases the feeling of strength, that helps you overcome and resist weakness, that's true happiness. Mm. Not contentment, but more power And I think he means strength here.
I think he does too, yeah.
So not contentment, but more strength. Not peace at any price, but war. Not virtue, but efficiency. Virtue in the Renaissance sense of virtu. Virtue free of moral acid. I love that. I love that. The weak and the botched shall perish. First principle of our charity. And one should help them to it. What is more harmful than any vice? Practical sympathy for the botched and the weak. Christianity. ...
These are clearly coming out of notes.
Right?
Where he's just like, I'm just free flowing here. I'm starting to get my dementia's kicking in, but
that's right.
I'm going to get stuff down on paper. Maybe it's worth noting too, in other writings.
What year did he write, or what year was this published?
This was published in 88.
There we go.
1888. That he's not critiquing like personal religion. He's critiquing institutional religion. So,
correct.
Because he even says it there at the end, Christianity, like we talked about in our series, with Robert Capon, on The Astonished Heart. And Capon is also critical of like the institutionalized church. When the faith gets institutionalized, it no longer, well, it actually, I think Nietzsche would probably say it's not alive anymore. It's dead.
Right.
And it has no benefit. It's just being, when it's dogmatized, when it's, what do you want to say? Systematized.
Institutionalized. Yeah.
Institutionalized. It's just made this thing that no longer, has any bearing or personal bearing. I think he's talking about Jesus' teaching maybe about, that the meek shall inherit the earth. Mm-hmm. And that's perfectly fine, like on an individual level, but as a corporate philosophy,
not helpful.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying here.
Right. Which is institutionally true. And in the present tense, you and I can both say, yeah, actually, that's kind of how the church as an institution in the United States has fleshed itself out.
It no longer has any influence.
Not only does it not have influence, but it has kind of withdrawn from the public square writ large. And so you have individual churches or local church bodies involved in charitable endeavors. Mm-hmm. And even like in our own church body, we definitely have within the synod, the world synod, or at least the reach of the synod in the world, we have charitable endeavors and charitable outreach and so forth and so on. But as far as being involved in the public square and the conversation that takes place in the public square, the Christian church they don't necessarily have a seat at the table anymore.
And I mean, spin that out from Nietzsche then. Are we saying then that's because we're not exercising the power that we have? We're just kind of standing back and playing passive or something.
Right. That as Capon points out, which you just alluded to, the purpose of the institution is self-preservation, not grace. Mm. And so like grace would be institutionally a sign of weakness and would be not virtuous then.
Oh.
It wouldn't be truly virtuous because it's actually propounding weakness, but rather that the strength of the institution is in its institutionalization of a certain ethical code or moral code, moral process.
And it needs to double down on that in Nietzsche's view.
Yeah.
Like, and actually use that as a powerful thing. I mean, I've heard this in preaching. Actually a friend of mine uses this commonly. He'll say a word from Jesus from the scripture, and then he'll say that's a powerful message.
Sure.
And I don't use that language.
Right.
I mean, I say this is significant or it's impressive or something like that. Or,
right.
But he'll say it's powerful. And I've never been comfortable with that language. And maybe it's because of this.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it seems like now I'm exerting or asserting, my will upon you as the preacher. And I'm not comfortable with that.
Well, and in Greek, that word is dynamis, which we get the word dynamite from. Something that's...
Well, and Paul does use that word, referring to the preaching of the gospel.
Yeah.
Having a power.
Right. So again, to recap, good, as Nietzsche defines it, good is the feeling of strength itself in man. Evil is whatever springs from weakness. Happiness is the feeling that your strength is increasing and then resist and overcome weakness. Contentment is about, or happiness isn't contentment, but rather more strength. And happiness doesn't come from peace at any price, but comes from war, from struggle. Happiness doesn't come from virtue, but from efficiency, meaning virtue free of moral acid, as he says.
I can't imagine why later on the Nazi Party would take Nietzsche as their own.
Can't imagine.
No, I'm not hearing it here.
Can't imagine how you would spin this up to serve your ism, your ideology.
Free of moral acid, right? I mean, wow. What an expression.
Love that, though, because we talked about this before we hit play, is Nietzsche truly Neoplatonic or is he a Hellenist? Does he really take Greek philosophy to its logical conclusion, or does he stop somewhere along the way? And I think my opinion is he doesn't stop. And so when he talks about virtue, he's talking about virtue free of moral acid. So why am I doing what's right and not doing what's wrong? Why am I seeking good instead of evil? Because that's true virtue. But I'm not doing it for a moral reason. Good is good for the sake of good, and bad is bad for the sake of bad. There's evil and there's good in a kind of Manichaean sense.
Yeah.
Or in an abstract sense, right? There's good and there's evil. There just is. He's saying, no, good actually comes with something that's concrete and real, strength.
And now Nietzsche doesn't. I mean, he's the reason why the postmoderns like him so much is he really doesn't have a sense of absolute truth, or at least an external absolute truth. There's an internal one. There's what you know to be true.
Right, which makes sense, right? Because this is why he's so appealing, and why I like him too, is he's essentially saying, listen, the truly free man is the man who is free from all institutional bindings and again, authority, rules, regulations that are imposed upon you by these institutions, whether it be political ideology, philosophical ideology, religious ideology, social ideology. The truly free man is the man who is free to make up his own mind and be self-determining. Because that's the Enlightenment, autonomy.
Right.
Like to be a sovereign individual, which you might understand because in the United States, in the present tense, at least half the United States is all about individual sovereignty, and the other half is all about groupthink and collectivism. And that essentially, to basically make a oversimplistic point of this, is that this is really the divide culturally in the United States.
Yeah.
You have a group of people who are saying, listen, the group can make the best decisions for what's good for everybody.
And you need to get on board.
And you need to get on board with the group. The other side is saying, no, each individual citizen is sovereign and can make a choice for him or herself about what is best for him or herself. And in fact, the group is the problem. So don't get on board with the group, get off and be your own individual self.
But that's not party politic then.
But that's not party politics. Nietzsche is very much, like you said, he's all about, well, what's going on inside you? Is this a feeling of strength? Is this a feeling of weakness? Is this increasing in you, or is this decreasing in you? It's all about the individual self. So of course he's going to be opposed to the church, especially in the 1800s, because the church in the 1800s in Germany especially was hand in glove with the state, because you have the rise of the Bismarck and
the church is there too.
Yes, exactly.
Oh.
And so what is more harmful than any vice? Sympathy for the botched and the weak. That is, Christianity.
Yeah, corporately speaking, right?
Yeah, corporately speaking. That doesn't mean that individuals can't be faithful Christians. But as soon as individuals join a church and then accept the language of that church, the doctrines of that church, the rituals of that church, the traditions, the piety, and everything that goes along with that church,
enslaved too.
Yeah, then they become a part of the state because they're both they're hand in glove. One is institutionalized and therefore no longer free. And also, by the way, more importantly, not strong. Because what do you do from there on? You depend on the institution to tell you how to think, how to speak, and what to do. You depend on it to take care of you, all the stuff that comes with it.
Yep.
So let's see. Let's skip down to Aphorism 4 because this is another good one. This is his anthropology now. And I like this one. Mankind surely does not represent an evolution toward a better or stronger or higher level, as progress is now understood. This quote-unquote progress is merely a modern idea, which is to say a false idea. The European of today, in his essential worth, falls far below the European of the Renaissance. The process of evolution does not necessarily mean elevation, enhancement, or strengthening. True enough, it succeeds in isolated and individual cases in various parts of the earth and under the most widely different cultures. And in these cases, a higher type certainly manifests itself. Something which, compared to mankind in the mass, appears as a sort of Übermensch. Superman.
Mm-hmm.
Such happy strokes of high success have always been possible and will remain possible perhaps for all time to come. Even whole races, tribes, and nations may occasionally represent such lucky accidents.
But on the whole,
it's impossible for a group, especially at the national level, or for an entire race of people, to become more human than human, or to at least achieve, like in this Greek philosophy, and Aristotle in particular, you are potentially someone. And the purpose of your life is to realize your true potential and become an actual man, for example. So you're moving from potentiality to actuality, from an acorn to a mighty oak tree, from a baby to an Olympic athlete, or a heroic warrior, or a beloved emperor, whatever it might be. But that's, like you said, that's the exception. For every Marcus Aurelius, there's 80 emperors that aren't worth throwing into the river.
Even remembering, yeah.
Or even remembering, exactly. For every prophet, there are going to be thousands in Israel who are false prophets. But
we don't talk about that.
But we won't talk about that. For every Da Vinci or Rembrandt, there's going to be a million artists whose works are never viewed or seen.
Well, even think about like J.S. Bach, right?
Yeah.
Who's the son of musicians. There's musicians in his family. His uncle is a musician and raises him, right? But then look at his children.
Right.
Well, Christoph, I guess we kind of remember.
Because he was J.S. Bach's kid.
Right, exactly. Well, yeah, but then his kids sold Bach's works for butcher paper.
Well,
Talk about legacy. I guess.
Gotta live.
I guess.
But reading Aphorism 4 in particular, because Hitler jumped on this one hard, the Nazis actually they took Nietzsche and did the very thing that Nietzsche's saying you can't do.
Right.
Which is they took his writings and then they institutionalized his philosophy.
Yeah, that as an institution, as a nation, that you can progress.
Right.
And be higher and better and stronger. And what Nietzsche's arguing for is like a radical individualism.
Right. In fact, the Nazis, for example, in an extreme example, is they would take girls and boys. They would sort them out. They would go village to village, city to city, school to school, and they would pick out young girls and young boys who they considered, according to their physical, mental measurements, to be the perfect Aryan youth. And then they would take them to chateaus up in the mountains, and they would have essentially what are mixers. Mm-hmm. And they would match them up and say, okay, you're going to have babies. Because your babies will be pure Nazi babies, pure Aryans.
Well, you could do it like the Russians and just use like steroids and things.
That too, right? If you're into winning the Olympics.
Or being banned.
More of that too.
Well, there's not going to be any Olympics anyway.
But think about reading Nietzsche and then saying, the best way to manifest Nietzsche's philosophy would be to create the master race. Like we're going to factory produce Supermen. When Nietzsche himself says in that very sentence that you just read, this is the exception, not something that should be considered normal.
Yeah, it's a unique case that an isolated individual,
yes,
can manifest a higher type of himself.
Correct. Now, on a different note, I would be, I think, remiss if I didn't point out that this kind of philosophy has been wholeheartedly embraced by the modern health and wellness movement. Because
that you can evolve, progress.
Yeah. That you can become bigger, faster, and stronger. Yeah, you can become a better version of the person that you were yesterday. In fact, that's kind of the point of life, is to be better than you were yesterday.
What Nietzsche says there at the end is that it only happens occasionally as a lucky accident.
Right. Which is why you chase it, though. It's, again, progress, not perfection.
Maybe you see this in like youth sports. I was just thinking about that,
Sure.
and the stats are always thrown out that like less than 1% make it to like professional level.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Primarily,
right.
Well,
this
right place,
is why
right
we watch
time.
American Idol.
Oh, that's true too.
And by we, I mean not us, but people.
But right place, right time. But you can't underestimate just genes,
Right.
the actual physical capacity, not just capability, but capacity.
Right.
Some people are just taller, stronger, more able.
Right.
It's a happy accident, if you like. You look at their parents and you wonder how that happened too sometimes.
Right, absolutely. So in individual cases, we can kind of become the person that we're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Or in rare cases, the people that we are supposed to be as a race, a tribe, or a nation. Apply this to the church, and it gets pretty messy and destructive.
Mm.
Because you and I have both been through this with various mission movements of, to grow your church, to be the church and this is the thing too, the language is always idealistic, and it latches onto the language of idealism and becomes very Platonic in its ideology.
Yeah.
But there is a perfect church, and that perfect church is full of people who give lots of money and they have lots of kids, so that our Sunday school and our confirmation classes and our youth groups are, bursting at the seams. And we're constantly having to add on to the church or move the church and build a bigger church. And that's a part of the American ethic of constant growth, and it's a business ethic.
Right.
But it also goes to this point. Is the purpose of this church charity? No, the purpose of this church is to grow.
I was thinking about progress, because I even use that language. I don't know if maybe it's just because we swim in those waters now, but thinking about, the things that I do and then looking for an improvement, a success, a progression.
Something you can measure.
Something that you can measure, whether it's attendance or it's, like you said, offerings, or even just like spiritual aptitude, like the ability to recall Bible stories or to integrate those. I mean, I'm not saying that catechesis is something that you should just stop doing because it doesn't show success. I think you continue to do it because you're under the mandate of Jesus to do it, right? And whether you see success or not, whether you see progress or not, or evolution or strengthening or enhancement or any of the language that Nietzsche uses, as soon as you start looking for that, that's where you get off the rails.
Well, Jesus says, go and baptize all people and teach them everything I've commanded you. Now, we love to embellish that and say, well, here's what he taught, but here's commentary on what he taught. Or here's an 8-volume dogmatics on what he taught.
Mm-hmm.
Or we take something like the reading from yesterday about the Canaanite woman, strong is your faith. And then we ask, well, how can my faith be stronger? Which goes back to Nietzsche's point. What is true happiness? To constantly have that feeling of strength,
right?
Of increased strength to overcome what resists you.
So the pursuit of happiness is to be stronger, better, make America great again.
And I was going to say, in my ecosystem, in my area, my genre, this is the purpose of training. And everything that comes as an offshoot of training, then you start to train, and then very quickly you ask yourself, well, do I need to change my diet? Do I need to change my sleep habits? Do I need to change what I do? And then you get stronger mentally, emotionally, and physically. So you continue to push forward with that. You train more days, more hours, more rounds. Then all of a sudden you start competing and fighting. So then it ups that, and you get stronger. You do get stronger.
Yeah.
And you do then say, well, I'm definitely stronger than I was 5 years ago or 20 years ago, or I'm stronger than I was last time. And there's that constant, we call it the grind, right?
Yeah.
Is that you're constantly grinding. And what's the end game here? The end game is just what's right now, which is to focus on the present tense and doing what's necessary to get stronger, physically, mentally, and emotionally, which again, for individuals is one thing, but to institutionalize that and make it a program, so to speak. And I've heard this from friends of mine who got into CrossFit very early on, and how they still love CrossFit, but they hate what CrossFit has become as far as like a product, like the CrossFit games and the way in which
gyms,
CrossFit has been. What's that?
Each individual performance is meant to elevate the success of the gym.
Correct. And so it's that push and pull of, I love what CrossFit does, and I love the community that I have in my local gym or whatever. I just don't like the direction that it's gone kind of writ large.
We have the best CrossFit gym in the area, that kind of thing.
Yes. And again, you get the acolytes of the founders of CrossFit, and everything has to be done the way that they do it. And it has to be a model of the gym that is over there in California. And again, same way. We do this with our churches. We do this with CrossFit gyms. I've seen this with martial arts, gyms. See it all over the place. Because I think what Nietzsche's tapping into too is it's human nature.
Mm-hmm.
But here it comes. Aphorism 5. We should not deck out and embellish Christianity. It, meaning Christianity, has waged a war to the death against this higher type of man.
Mm.
It has put all the deepest instincts of this type under its ban. It has developed its concept of evil, of the evil one himself, out of these instincts. The strong man is the typical reprobate, the outcast among men. Christianity has taken the part of all the weak, the low, the botched. It has made an ideal out of antagonism to all of the self-preservative instincts of sound life. It has corrupted even the faculties of those natures that are intellectually most vigorous by representing the highest intellectual values as sinful, misleading, as full of temptation. The most lamentable example, the corruption of Pascal, who believed that his intellect had been destroyed by original sin, whereas it was actually destroyed by Christianity.
Wow, there's a lot to think about there.
Yeah, well, one, he's essentially pointing out that during the Enlightenment, this is with the beginning of the church actually pulling away from the sciences. Instead of being the sponsor of the sciences, and you and I both know there are a lot of famous scientists from the 1800s who were devout Lutherans.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They were men of faith, and they saw no conflict between their faith and the scientific method.
Sure.
But yet, we also see after Vatican I, the Roman Catholic Church saying, yeah, we're having nothing to do with this Enlightenment and this scientific method and all of these different theories that are popping up, becoming popular. No, wrong.
They couldn't avoid the influence eventually. They
Totally
reverse direction on that.
Yeah. But that's what I mean is that there's so much going on culturally in Europe right now that plays into this too.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big ones is, like he alludes to Pascal, is now Christianity and the sciences are no longer, they're not parallel playing anymore. They're not even, like the church sponsored these people. Like they bankrolled them and their scientific research. And now that's starting to pull apart from each other. There's a gap now between the church and Christianity and the sponsoring of the sciences.
Well, and I think maybe it's worth remembering what part, of Europe he's in. He's in the Prussian, Empire. It's Saxony, but it's part of Prussia at this point.
Yeah.
And, is he rejecting, what we would call liberal Christianity, the state-based Christianity, or is he rejecting the more of the faith-based, the actual, Christianity, we would say, where Jesus emphasizes that he comes not for the strong, but for the weak, that kind of thing.
Right.
It seems to be it's the latter. It's not so much, the will to power, I don't want to say liberal Christianity, where it's basically we pull out the moral teachings of Jesus.
Yeah.
But even then he's got that because he's talking about, the support of the weak and the needy, that is counterintuitive. It doesn't even make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you support those who are the weakest institutionally, corporately?
Yeah. Right.
You support the strongest, because then you will overcome.
Right. Well, and also the weak, the low, the botched. Who is it up to this point who has run social services for most places? It's the church.
Oh, yeah.
Who sets up prisons and reform schools for boys and girls? Who sets up
orphanages and hospitals,
orphanages, these kinds of things. The Christian church does. And that kind of became what the church was known for, which was public works. And especially in this country, in the colonies in particular. And then as we move into the later 1800s, into the 20th century, more and more then the church gives that up to the state.
So Nietzsche's critique is that the church is being destructive, to the individual.
It's weakening society.
It's weakening the individual, so it's weakening society.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Like we could actually do a lot better than we're doing, but because we're all caught up in these religious ideals, we can't actually improve as humanity. So he actually has a high anthropology in a way.
Yeah, because he's saying, listen, Pascal had a lot to offer. He was intellectually gifted. And yet then the church just said, well, no, actually your intellect is just original sin. What you want, what you're
Corrupted,
thinking, what
anyway.
you're doing is corrupted by original sin. And that's what his point is. Like, actually, Christianity as a religion destroyed Pascal. And by destroying Pascal, it essentially deprived society then of all the benefits of his thinking.
When we were talking about Nietzsche being a Hellenist, I read one critique that said, unlike the Christian church that would bring in, Platonic ideas, Augustine, we've talked about that with Augustine, they didn't go where Plato would have you go because they synergized it with the Christian faith. So it becomes this kind of, muted teaching from Plato, or at least filtered through the scriptures. Whereas Nietzsche, divorces himself of that kind of, influence of the scriptures and takes Plato, Aristotle, and goes all the way,
right?
Where they would lead, which is basically, mankind is the highest, form of life.
And yet, in Aphorism 4, he draws out, I actually don't think we're progressing. I think we're actually digressing.
But he's saying why here in Aphorism 5, which is that we're hamstrung by the Christian faith.
Yeah. Well, the Christian religion.
The Christian religion of promoting the weak, the low, and the botched.
Right, exactly. Because again, remember what happiness is: strength, will to power, that feeling inside you. And so the church is taking that and saying, no, actually that's evil, that's original sin. And that what Nietzsche defines as weakness, or evil actually, which is weakness. So the church then is promoting evil, according to him, because what is good? Whatever augments the feeling of strength in man. What is evil? Whatever springs from weakness. Well, by propping up the weak, the botched, the least, the last, the lowest, the lost, and the dead, to quote Capon, you're propping up evil. You're
going to have an unhappy group of people.
And then you're going to have because you're not increasing that feeling of strength in individuals, but rather, you're creating contentment in individuals around such things as peace at any price, otherwise known as compromise, and virtue, but virtue that is, in his opinion, stained by moral acid, eaten away at by more.
Yeah, and he wouldn't call that contentment. He would call that, like weak passivity, or I don't know. Just, it's not being content. Well, maybe content is actually a good word, but it's certainly not happy.
Naive.
Yeah, there you go. That's a better word. Yeah.
It's promoting naivety. It's almost like a willful naivety on the part of the institution, because the institution is just saying, again, listen, these are virtues. Your weakness is a virtue. Maintaining the public peace at any price, and peace at church at any price, that's a virtue. And also then helping others live this way is where true happiness and true godliness lies.
And you're requiring people to not follow their natural instincts, to be
Correct.
who they already are. You're forcing them into being something that they're not, right?
Right.
And I'm thinking about modern like political dialogue. Well, it's not really dialogue. It's really just people yelling at each other, not listening to each other. But
right.
It's that will to power, that will to the individual. I mean, it does guide a lot of our current political climate. What Absolutely. I want for myself is ultimately what is best for me.
Right.
And I'm not going to listen to what any external authority is going to tell me.
Because I'm a self-determining, autonomous individual. And only true freedom can be found in being an individual who is free from all of these different groups and organizations and movements and ideologies that people coalesce around that are going to try and tell me how to think and how to speak and how to live.
Or how dare they even tell me what my chromosomes mean? As we said last episode.
Right. And how many people leave church or quit a church because they're just sick and tired of the pastor, quote unquote, lecturing them from the pulpit about how they should live their life?
Or how they should relate to other people.
Or how many people go to church on Sunday and say, well, I'm just here for my, I'm here for myself. This is between me and God. Like, my time in church is my time to be with God. And yet you have your rituals and traditions, and we all agree in a kind of like implicit social contract that we're all here for the same reason, but we all know we're not. So,
this is late 19th century, but the influences, it's all.
I was going to say, one of the things that I've been talking about a lot the last 6 months or so is weak piety and where it comes from. Because, again, I've talked about this extensively to you, is you read the Old Testament and even the New Testament, and these people their piety is so radically different than anything that we have today. Like, the prophet's like, I think you're lying, God. You know what? You are lying. And I'm going to wait for you to prove to me that you're not a liar. Or the psalmist saying, what are you, an impotent old man? You can't even get out of your bed to help me? Or just Joshua.
Right.
Basically being told, listen, this is what's going to happen. You're going to take the people into Canaan, and I'm going to annihilate everybody. Or the God of Samson, whatever it might be. Is the piety of the Old Testament saints is so radically removed from any of what we consider piety today that they don't even resemble this. Like, I can't even say they're the same thing anymore.
No.
To Nietzsche's point. And I think Nietzsche would actually agree with me that the weak piety comes as a consequence of the Christian religion as an institution saying to people, don't imitate the piety of Joshua or Samson or David or the prophets. Imitate the piety of, and then they give you a list of people who are all weak, what do you want to say? Pitiful.
Yeah.
These kinds of things.
Well, think about
the kinds of people that Jesus had mercy on.
Think about the way that we heard Jacob wrestling, right, with the man, who
exactly, perfect example,
right, and demands that he be blessed, and will not let go of his God. I mean, he's literally fighting with him.
Yeah,
and is that fair? Can you do that? Can you call God on account or on the mat, literally? I guess there,
right? Yeah,
and he does, and he won't let go of him. And we talked about the Canaanite woman, who's getting their Jesus. His piety is not so weak either,
right?
He's being very harsh, antagonistic. Bitter. The words that he speaks are not kind to her, and she just suffers it and fights right back. And it is a fight. I mean, it's an argument, and it's very personal, and that just rubs us the wrong way. It's just like, you can't do that. You can't be like that. Blessed are the weak. Blessed are the kind.
I think, I'm sorry, I'm writing notes to myself so I don't forget this later, but I think that's a good place to stop because Aphorism 7, which is much longer and could actually take up an entire episode by itself. Again, Christianity is the religion of pity. So come back for the next episode here in the week, and we will dive back into Friedrich Nietzsche's Antichrist and continue with aphorism number 7 and 8. Juicy stuff, but I hope, as always, that this gets you thinking and maybe stimulates you to go off and read Antichrist by Nietzsche and even get together at church with a group of people and read it out loud and say, hey, does he have a point? Does he have something? Is there something we can learn from this atheist who grew up a pastor's kid who was going to go into the ministry? And would you yourself have been an atheist if you had been alive in the 1860s where Nietzsche was at? But yeah, again, it's one of those things of never rest on your laurels, but always ask, are we being faithful to the Word of God? And are we focused on Christ and the gift of salvation? Or is there something else at play? So come back again and we'll get after it. Peace.